gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 16th edition of School of Tomorrow events, Guardians of the Future, Shaping Tomorrow with Generative AI. The non-profit SOT event series was launched by Beacon House in 2000 to engage global communities in conversations that shape the future of schools and societies. I would like to thank Google for Education, the lead sponsor for SOT, and their partner Tech Valley, our titanium sponsor UBL. Other key sponsors include My Backpack, MK Books, Allied Bank Limited, Habib Bank Limited, Wateen, and Interwood. We also thank our SOT supporters, including Paramount Books and Nestle Pure Life, who have contributed to this year's event. Moving on to our housekeeping instructions, please ensure your cell phones are silent. Please use the SOT app to scan the QR code for session Q&A and feedback. Share your thoughts on social media using the hashtags, that is, hashtag Guardians of the Future and hashtag SOT 2023. If you need assistance, our ushers are here to help you. For questions, please use the flashcards provided by the ushers or the mobile app. The panel discussions will last for about 45 minutes, followed by 15 minutes for question and answer. Faith, family, and fortitude is what our next session is about. For a heart-to-heart talk, we invite Mr. Alyy Khan as an interviewer for our next delightful dialogue on the topic Lost to the World. Mr. Alyy Khan, a versatile Asian-British actor and host who has worked in Hollywood, Bollywood, and Lollywood films and in multiple television series. He is known for his remarkable roles in the national and international films, A Mighty Heart, Dawn 2, Teen Bahadur, Actor-in-Law, Anjuman, and Mahemir. He has also appeared...
Madam, मेरा session हो गया, इनका तारुफ कराएं, madam.
Sir, वो आप करें. He has also appeared in several television series, including The Bill, Strike Back, and Indian Summers. Mr. Alyy made his Bollywood debut in 2003. He received the Best Actor Award at the Mumbai Shorts International Film Festival for his performance in the short film Kacharachi in 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Alyy Khan on board.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. We have a super, super exciting session here with really a Superman. I don't know how many of us can even imagine what this gentleman has gone through. So without further ado, inhi ki zubani se sunte hain. Please welcome with a standing ovation and lots of taliyan, Shabby T, aka Shahbaz Taseer. ये कब की तस्वीर है यार?
Not too long ago. I know it looks like a mug shot, but my wife complains about this a lot. She says you look very unhappy when people take pictures, but this is my best smile.
मुझे तो लग रहा था कि रोने वाले हैं, ये कह रहे हैं कि स्माइल नहीं, मगर माशाल्लाह कितने भोले लग रहे हैं, जरा ये देखें. मुझे तो हैरत इस बात की हो रही है कि इतना सब सहने के बावजूद अभी भी आपके चेहरे पर जो तासुर नजर आ रहे हैं, they're so innocent and childlike.
You know, your experiences in life, they do shape you and they do sort of define you. But you should never lose yourself, no matter what happens to you in life. And I think मेरी कहानी जो है इसमें, for me, the most important thing is, I felt like पूरी दुनिया मेरे खिलाफ थी, but I had to fight for myself, just for the person that I am, for the simple things. Nothing extravagant, nothing too big. You know, you said Superman, that's very kind. I remember a lot of nights that, you know, there was no Superman, just a very scared man, broken, very scared, very, just always wondered what I'd done to end up in the place that I'd ended up in. And despite the adversity and the trials, I never wanted to lose whoever that guy is. And that's my biggest success out of this entire episode, that I'm still Shabby T and Shahbaz Taseer. So that's my biggest win.
आप लोगों में से यहाँ कितने लोगों ने ये किताब पढ़ी है? जाहिल लोग. एक बंदे ने हाथ उठाया. कमाल है जी. और हमारे सारे टीचर्स यहाँ बैठे हैं. बीकन हाउस क्या कर रहे हैं आप लोग जी? किताब पढ़ ले. बहुत पढ़ी है किताब. पढ़ा रहे हैं क्या? स्कूल के सिलेबस में पढ़ा रहे हैं? कहाँ पढ़ा रहे हैं जी? इंटरव्यू सुने. मैं शहबाज से अभी यही कह रहा था बाहर कि जाहिर सी बात है, जब मुझसे कहा गया कि आई शुड मॉडरेट दिस सेशन, आई ऑल्सो काइंड ऑफ watched a lot of his interviews, and I thought to myself that since we have a chance to have this conversation, let's try and talk about stuff that hasn't necessarily been covered in the interviews before, and let's try and have a conversation that is more positive than the claustrophobic feeling one gets when one is reading your book. When I was asked to do this interview, my first thing was obviously that I need to read the book. I read the book. It's a fantastic read. It's a read that... Are you a first-time author? You're a first-time author.
Yeah, I've only been kidnapped once, so this is it.
Boss, you need to write happy stories now, right? Because clearly you are a good author. So it's a book that is frightening, and surprisingly, it's also a book that's extremely, extremely identifiable. क्योंकि मैं कराची का रिहाइश नहीं था और क्योंकि मैं हाल ही में आया हूँ, I decided, Shahbaz, to do everything that Karachi has to offer. So I go to places which a lot of people say is not safe. मैं cycling करता हूँ group के साथ, हम दूर दराज जगह पे चले जाते हैं. And I see a lot of the similar characters that you've mentioned, but I can never in my wildest dream imagine going through what you have, but I could identify with your scenario at every step of the way because it seems so real. Now, having said that, and having put your trials and tribulations on one side, I did a naughty thing. I said, यार कासिम कसूरी को थोड़ा सा impress करते हैं. अब ये AI की conference है, तो मैं सवाल खुद लिखने के बाद, instead of writing the questions myself, why don't I ask ChatGPT to frame questions for Shahbaz Taseer and see what ChatGPT comes up with, right? So it's not plagiarism, it's the brainchild of my wife who's sitting here. But here goes, right? Chale, bismillah karte hain. So the first thing I'd like to ask you, Shahbaz, and we've got all of 49 minutes left, so no rush. Please enlighten us on, obviously, the significant lessons and the insights you gained from your experience in captivity.
Well, the most significant lesson was to not get kidnapped again, and to do whatever I could to ensure that.
Oh, incidentally, I'm going to interrupt you here for a second. Maze ki baat jante hain? Somewhere in the book, in the first few pages, it says that prior to him getting kidnapped, he had just finished reading A Mighty Heart.
Yeah, I actually saw the movie on the plane to Lahore just before I got kidnapped. So it's crazy.
And you know that I play...
Yes, yes.
Right? I play Sheikh Umar in the movie, so I thought that was a bit ironic, right, for Sheikh Umar to be interviewing him.
You can't believe my surprise when I found out that we were doing this together, especially with the trauma that A Mighty Heart caused me. The movie itself is wonderful, but to get kidnapped right after that, you know, and you have a very real idea of what's going to happen to you. And, you know, putting the humor aside, I actually reached out to his wife and to his family, because it's absolutely insane, but if he, I don't know who, a lot of people don't survive इन लोगों के पास, ये किसी को ज़्यादा देर ज़िंदा नहीं छोड़ते. And so all our stories, some that have passed, a very few that have survived, are so similar that for someone like me who was going through it in that moment, he was the only person I could relate to and through his wife's narration. But coming back to your question about the lessons that I learned, because it's very important, they were lessons that I learned. मेरी ज़िंदगी में कभी कुछ ऐसा नहीं हुआ था जिसने मुझे इस चीज़ के लिए तैयार किया था. Like a lot of you, मैं भी एक normal school गया था, college गया था, काम करता था, मैंने चीज़ें देखी हुई थी, हम सब पाकिस्तान में रहते हैं, but you just never expect, and you have to understand that just 7 महीने पहले, I had lost my father to a violent extremist, not a terrorist, but a violent extremist. He wasn't part of any terrorist group, just a young man who was radicalized by a man in a mosque on something that wasn't even true, but he was willing to carry this act out. And knowing all of this, I still wasn't ready for what happened to me, and I never expected it in my wildest dreams. The first lesson that I ever learned, and I remember it because I was in a very dark place, and actually it is a very dark place. अंधेरा कमरा होता है, कोई लाइट नहीं है, कोई किसी किस्म का पंखा या हीटर या बिस्तर या you know any kind of comfort that we take for granted, just nothing, and the worst kind of imprisonment. And what it does is it causes you to become hopeless, and it's very normal. It's an absolutely normal human feeling to lose hope in a very difficult situation, to be upset, to be scared. And I did something that I have never done in my life, which was I started reading the Quran for protection because I had nothing. Nothing that I'd learned in my life, nothing that I'd learned in school, nothing that I'd learned through relationships, friendships, in any scenario. A few lessons from my father, because he had been incarcerated and tortured for his political beliefs and conviction. And I was reading the Quran, and I'll never forget, I was in a pretty dark place, and I read this ayat that kind of said, to be hopeless is to leave Islam. And I felt that that was a bit harsh, because how can you not be hopeless in the kind of scenario or situation that I was in? And I had a tafsir ki kitab. It's a bit difficult to understand. It was written by Sayyid Qutb, who is the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood and the man who's inspired men like Osama bin Laden and radical Islam. But where they say that if a man says 10 bad things, maybe he's got one good thing that he said. And in this tafsir I read, where he said, how can you be hopeless? Because to be hopeless is to give up on the divinity of God. It is to stop believing in it is to look at Him through your eyes. You should never look at God through your eyes. You are His creation, and one of billions, And so what seems like a dark room for you is a room full of windows for Allah. And what seems like a place where no light can enter is a place that He can fill with light. And what is light? Light is faith in your heart. So, the first thing that I learned was, regardless of how difficult my situation was, I was not going to give up.
You read the Quran in English?
I read it in English. I learned to recite it in Arabic. I had to read the tafsir in Urdu, and I know that I went to the Lahore American School, and then I went to Beacon House National University, but Urdu was never part of my curriculum, unfortunately. My grandfather is a poet, and my father is a writer, and it's quite shameful. I can speak Urdu, I can speak Punjabi, I can even read a little bit of my grandfather's poetry, but I learned Urdu through these books of hadith and tafsir, by learning to read them, because I needed to find strength. And I've not only found hope, I not only found, I don't like to say a layer that was like a shield. But it was like, I really believe that small things like the Ayatul Kursi and the three coals, they form like a layer of protection around you. And I always try to explain this to people. I've said this in a few interviews as well, but that protection isn't necessarily your well-being. And I know that sounds funny. My father used to wear the Ayatul Kursi around his neck. And he used to say that, ये आयतुल कुर्सी मैं हर दिन पढ़ता हूँ और ये मुझे अल्लाह मुझे अपनी प्रोटेक्शन में रखता है. And when Abba died, he was wearing the Ayatul Kursi, and I never took anything from him except that Ayatul Kursi. And I was very upset when I held it in my hand because I wondered why a good man was not protected when he was wearing this. It actually makes you question your beliefs. This is before getting kidnapped. And when I got kidnapped, I realized that the Ayatul Kursi isn't necessarily there to protect your life. It's not there to protect your children. It's not there to protect your wealth. It's there to protect your soul and your heart. And sorry, I get a little... And the reason that I say this to you is because my father was shot 29 times by an AK-47. And I had to bury him. So I saw his body. And the doctor who was with me, the man who performed his autopsy, I always wondered what can a doctor say to you in a situation like this? But he put his hand on my shoulder and he said that every single organ in his body was destroyed except for his heart and his mind. And you take what you can from that, young man.
Subhanallah. Ayatul Kursi ji.
And I really believe it. My father's spirit today is beyond, it means to people that want it to mean something, a lot more than what it means to me, because he was my father. He was not a politician for me. He was not a civil society member. He was none of these things. He was just Abba for me. But his memory is a lot bigger than just being my Abba. It's actually, he's become a symbol for people that require hope and protection in a very difficult place. And by the way, that's also a lesson that I learned through my kidnapping. How proud I am to be my father's son. Because somewhere along while solitary confinement is where you find God, but torture is where, every concept that you have is shattered. It's such a dehumanizing and the word is dehumanizing. It's a very dehumanizing experience. You feel like an animal by the end of it. But my kidnapper, you said, made one mistake while he was torturing me. He told me that you deserve this because of the man that your father was. And I actually smiled in that moment. And I thought, well, my father was the most wonderful man. And he never even died from probably the things that I would end up, dying for. Maybe money, work, your routine, your daily routines, the things that you hold valuable, your family, your friends, whatever this cycle of life involves. He didn't care for any of it. The fact that there was a poor woman, her faith didn't matter. Muslim, Christian, Hindu, none of this mattered. She was a poor woman who had been falsely accused of a crime proven by the courts of Pakistan. And she just needed help. She needed representation. And what a lot of people in this country don't realize is that the rich get help when they want. Middle class struggles, but the poor get no help in this country. And I'm very proud to be the son of a man that didn't care about these barriers, that felt the need that there should always be someone and when you say poor, it's not really financial, but desperate people who need help. Financial help is the last thing they need. Their lives are being torn apart. And there was a man, and some people say he was the last man, but he wasn't. And I believe, because I speak to so many people in this country, and you were saying you've given a lot of interviews and talks. The reason that I do this is to meet these amazing people that remember him, and maybe could be inspired by him to remember that there are people less fortunate than us in this country that require help. And maybe he can inspire, maybe not me, but someone from here to do that.
Allah Ta'ala unhe jannat naseeb kare, jannat-e-firdaus naseeb kare. I'm terribly sorry for your loss, boss.
No,
So we've understood the fact that you discovered, or let me say rediscovered, the Quran during your trials and tribulations. So to keep that thought running, since your release from captivity, how has this perspective on life and faith actually evolved currently, while you're not in that same terrible situation?
Well, if there's ever severe turbulence on a plane, you'll see me reading my do nafal quickly. but it's your connection with God is this amazing feeling. And I always try to explain to people, I am a cultural Muslim. I was born in a Muslim country to Muslim parents, and my upbringing is of Islam. So this is the faith that I rely on. But faith is across religion. And you can see a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew or people of different faiths, but they reach this level where they believe that their faith gives them protection, it gives them guidelines, it allows them to live their life in a way where they feel better about themselves. And that is what my faith is to me. I really believe that it's something that is deeply personal. And I know I'm speaking to an audience right now, and I'm speaking about my faith, and I really believe that my faith saved me. But it's not pressure on someone. Faith is something you have to find. Even though I was born in a Muslim country, in a Muslim home, went to a Muslim school, all have Muslim friends, whatever, this whole thing, I actually found my faith in captivity when there was nothing else there. I realized I didn't even know anything about Islam till I started studying it during captivity. And I became so passionate about it that it didn't just become a matter of my faith. And I know in civilized society, I always try to explain to people, read about your faith, understand it. It's a deeply personal thing, and don't judge other people for their lack of more or different faith. But in that place where I discovered my faith, you have to understand I was dealing with a very strange conflict. These people said that they were Muslims as well, and that they had the same faith as me. But they were carrying out atrocious acts right before my eyes. Whether it was I don't know if many of you remember in 2014 when the Karachi airport was attacked. And there were 19 suicide bombers that attacked it, and they fought almost all night. That was my kidnapper and 19 Uzbek boys that he trained in front of me. And none of those boys went there to fight. They went there to fight for a certain time and blow themselves up. So the blowing themselves up part, that radicalization, that putting it inside their mind and that conviction, because it is a conviction, you don't understand it. They feel that as soon as they press this button, they'll have paradise. But the truth is that Islam doesn't teach you this. And I'm sorry, I'm going in a little bit of a different direction, but the Prophet and his companions suffered like no Muslim will till the end of time. And through that suffering, their number one strength was patience. They had patience in the face of suffering. And when they had success, when they actually conquered Makkah in a bloodless war, the ayat that came down from God was, do you feel pleasure now when you see this? It wasn't of the conquest of Makkah or the wars that they'd fought and won or the people that they'd lost, but for the sabr they did when Islam came down in the beginning, for the martyrs that they buried under persecution, under starvation, under imprisonment, under torture, that sabr. And nowhere during that sabr did anyone take their life. There were women and children that were starved in valleys. None of them took their life. And so the concept of it, the very concept of taking life and thinking that I'll find paradise is wrong. So I found myself arguing with these men. And it became funny because I always tell people that in our society, Pakistan में इस्लाम के बारे में बात करना बड़ा मुश्किल होता है. सबसे पहले आपको डिफाइन करना होता है मैं सुन्नी हूँ, फिर मैं कौन सा सुन्नी हूँ, हानिफी हूँ, सालफी हूँ, किस तबके से ताल्लुक़ रखता हूँ, या मैं शिया हूँ, फिर मैं इस तरह का हूँ, इस तरह का हूँ, इस तरह का हूँ. So there are so many things, मगर इन लोगों के अंदर ये नहीं होता. ये तो पहली बात एक किस्म के मुसलमान होते हैं. और I found it, and no, absolutely no offense to the wonderful audience, or any audience actually that I've ever spoken in front of, but उनके साथ बात करना ज़्यादा आसान होती थी इधर बात करना. वो डिबेट करने के लिए तैयार थे, वो encourage करते थे. और मतलब it's not that I managed to convince them, but I left them speechless many times. And for me, that was a huge win. That meant that I understood my faith and that I could actually argue with a man who also understood his faith. My kidnapper was a mufti. And to be a mufti is like being a PhD in a subject. You give fatwas being a mufti. So, you know, I felt like it was an incredible achievement, probably along the same lines as writing this book, arguing with that mufti.
So you're saying that adversity is necessarily to find faith?
No, that's how I found my faith.
And then having found it, and now that you are not in an adverse situation, my question to you was, has that faith actually evolved over the years, having found it and having understood the tenets of the religion?
See, I would feel that it would be a great crime for me to ever stop being grateful for the situation that I find myself in. And the situation that I find myself in is not as simply as मैं जिंदा हूँ. जिंदा तो बहुत लोग होते हैं, मगर शहबाज जो किडनैप हुआ था 26 अगस्त 2011 में, वो ही शहबाज आज जिंदा है. And for that, I can only ever be grateful to Allah because I prayed to Him in those dark moments. And when I got my relief, I'll never forget, there's an ayat in the Quran, and I read this obviously while I was there. And it said, तुम हमसे, उर्दू में मैं आपको ट्रांसलेशन बताऊंगा, वो था कि तुम हमसे जब दुआ मांगते हो तुम बहुत मुसीबत में होते हो, और जब हम तुम पे रहम करते हैं और तुम्हारी मुसीबत दूर बन जाते हैं, कभी भी नाशुक्रे ना होना और नाशुक्रों में से होना ना. So I feel like my kidnapper right now. but I can never stop being grateful to Allah, because I know, you know, part of my story is also understanding that I come from a very privileged background. My father didn't. He worked very hard to be the man that he was. I don't have the same handicap. And you were speaking of nepotism, but you know, I was born in a privileged home. I can't deny that. The career that I choose and the judgment that I get for that, because I'm my father's son, may be slightly unfair. But the privilege that I'm born in is not something I can deny. Being born in that privilege, what it does is it does make you a certain kind of person. And to be back there, exactly the same person that went, to have that privilege, to have all of these things around me, I can't not thank God. I can't ever be ungrateful, because it's like He picked me up, deleted 5 years and put me in exactly the same place as the same person. When I speak about my experiences, it doesn't hurt me. This is a gift from God. When I think about my experiences and what's happened to me, it doesn't take me to a bad place. This has to be a gift from God, because there are many survivors that don't have these luxuries and these privileges. So my faith is as strong as it was. Do I do 10,000 zikr a day? No, I don't. I have a daily life and a daily routine as well. But do I stop to breathe and remember how lucky I am? Every single day. There can never be a day in my life that I'm not grateful. And sorry, I have 3 of the most beautiful children, you know, and I know how many nights I thought I'd never have this. I was 26 when I got picked up, and I just, you know, at a 26-year-old looking at death, you've done nothing in your life. you've got nothing in your life. There's no achievement, there's nothing. And today, if you tell me there's an author, you're a survivor, there's so many things that you can associate with me. But the most wonderful gift that I have is those 3 children. And I know how much I prayed for them. So I look at them and I'm reminded of, how grateful I should be.
Alhamdulillah, you're blessed, truly. So can you tell us if you have any specific initiatives or causes you're currently passionate about, other than the love of your children?
It's
What does Shahbaz Taseer get off on now in today's world?
This will sound crazy, but I've been back 7 years. It took me about 4.5 to write this book. And I feel like I've just put my life back together. And this is crazy because I have 3 children, so if they hear this, they'll be like, we cannot believe you tell us to be responsible and you haven't put your life together at 39. But, there's so much involved when you come from where I was. It wasn't as simple as just being in jail and being tortured and away from your family. I also lived in a war zone for 4.5 years. So when I came back, it's a bit of a cultural shock. It's not easy to sit in a nice car, to lie on a bed, to have televisions. These damn smartphones didn't exist when I got kidnapped. So it took me a really long time to adjust. And I remember I wake up at 5:30 in the morning. And some people might think that's Mamba mentality. Kobe Bryant used to do these things. But by 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I used to have this exhaustion, like my day should end. Now, if you're in an office, who cares if you woke up at 5:30 if you're exhausted by 12? So there were so many small things in my life that I had to work on, whether it was, my bones had all become mush because I'd just been tied up and kept on the floor for, 3 odd years. And that's actually not a joke. Your spine takes a hit, your muscles take a hit. My muscles were deteriorated, I was dehydrated. I had scabies, which is ridiculous. It's like a bacterial infection that you get by being glued together with 120 Taliban in a closed space. All kinds of things, but nothing that stuck, right? Nothing that I couldn't work on. So I've actually spent the last 7 years working on myself, working on my family, integrating myself back into my work life, writing this book, talking about it. And then, I'll be honest with you, one of the things that I hope that people get when I speak about this is my father's story. And it's the most important thing for me, is to put that across today on a platform in Pakistan, because I have this platform because of him.
Is that your second book?
I hope so. It would be the most amazing thing that I would get to do.
It would be most fitting, I think.
It would be an unbelievable.
And in a way, it would also be closure for you.
It would, because, I have a sense of triumph over my experience. I overcame it. God helped me. I made a character. I escaped. There's a lot of things. If I hadn't escaped and there was a prisoner exchange, I don't know what kind of man I would be. Because the number one name on that prisoner exchange was my father's killer. And I believe I would have lived a life of humiliation. I would be the guy that traded my life for my father's killer. And that's a burden that nobody would understand except me. And the fact
But ironically enough, you wrote that the day you were released was the day he was executed.
And this is why when I tell you to believe in God's divinity, regardless of your faith, God showed me my miracle. And my miracle is not even my survival. It's not how many drone strikes or tortures or any of these things that I survived. But the day that I escaped was a leap year. It was the 29th of February 2016. And I ran away from that Afghan jail, in the middle of Afghanistan, by the way, right after Fajr. And it took me 7 days to come home. And when I came home, the first thing that they told me was they have to reveal me to the media, because 7 days ago, on the 29th of February after Fajr, they hung my father's killer. And I just remember smiling. The Corps commander of Quetta told me this information, and I just said, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And I think I said it 3 times, and I couldn't believe it. you know, that they hung this man. And I know how difficult that must have been for the government and judiciary. And
Buddy, it's for an actor like me, because not for an actor like me, for an actor, when you read your book, it's extremely visual and it's extremely disturbing. And obviously, the audience and the reader knows from the onset that you have escaped. So, whilst it wasn't an easy read, which is not to say that it wasn't an interesting or a gripping read, it's extremely claustrophobic and dark and uncomfortable. It's fascinating to think how much resilience man has and how much the human body is capable of. एक कहावत है, you ask someone कि भाईजान कब तक जीना चाहते हैं, और बंदा कहता है सर 80 साल मुझे मिल जाए तो बहुत हैं. आप उसी बंदे को 79 की उम्र पे पूछे तो वो कहेगा यार 10 साल और चाहिए. तो बात वही हो गई. But with your physical condition and you having gone through everything you did, the way you've described your final freedom of having to walk over to that house which you could see from the camp, and you thinking it's an hour away, but when you actually started that trek, it took you 5 hours to get there, and you find this bunch of Taliban goons on their little 70cc bikes, and then you got onto the back of a bike with that malnutrition and that weakness and those years of extreme deprivation. And then through that cold weather, on the back of a bike, you rode 6 days to Quetta. So tell us about that arduous journey and what you were actually feeling, and was there actual belief that you would eventually get back home?
you know, this was the best part of the entire story, I have to tell you. Firstly, I just to answer in 3 parts, the book is very difficult. And I wanted it for people to read it while visualizing that claustrophobia. Because the early part of the book is really claustrophobic. You know, solitary confinement. When my father was in solitary confinement, he told me that the one thing that I realized was the line between sanity and insanity is so thin. It's so thin that there's a world on the sanity side, but as soon as you flip, it's like you're gone. And it's like an abyss, it just consumes you. And you're lost in darkness. And I've always wondered, you know, a fully sane person who's gone through so much trauma to have lost that sanity, that maybe innocence, that person that they were, what, you know, must happen to them. So I wanted you to feel that. I wanted you to feel that pain. I wanted you to put it down a little bit, but then pick it up because you can visualize it. And then to breathe as well, knowing that, yaar, ye banda zinda bhi hai, because he's, you know, likh raha hai kitab.
I must interrupt you and congratulate you, because I went through all these exact emotions. It's a great read, guys. You must get your hands on this book, yeah?
But, and sorry, the last part, the escape. I didn't have much fun through my captivity. I had one amazing gift, again, from God, where one of my guards was a Manchester United fan. Now, don't judge us on the last 10 years, but Man United is the biggest club in the world. And to be able to listen to them in solitary confinement with a madman is unique, because, you know, I mean, you're losing a game, or is bande ke paas grenades hain. So, you know, you don't want a disgruntled Taliban Man United fan. But I also dealt with that. But it was a very difficult time, and I had a few moments of happiness, which was I moved in with a family, I fell in love with the children, you know, they brought me back to life. I felt like they breathed, like they gave me like pieces of my humanity back. I always tell people that if you're like a glass, think of me as somebody who was completely shattered, and these little children put all these pieces back. I was still broken, but, you know, they put this back, and then I saw them all, you know, murdered and killed and bombed, and it's awful. It was really the entire experience. There's just no joy in it. And then I managed to get picked up by the Taliban, and they put me in front of a shura, and they set me through a proper trial. And मुझे समझ में नहीं आ रही थी मैं इनको क्या बोलूं. मैं इनको बता दूं मैं शहबाज तासीर हूं, उसके बाद क्या होएगा. ये कहेंगे ओए ये हमारे पास आ गए. You know, this cycle will start again. तो मैंने कहा मैं एक अंग्रेज़ हूँ, पाकिस्तानी अंग्रेज़ नहीं, बस अंग्रेज़ हूँ. मैं मैनचेस्टर से आया हूँ और मेरा नाम यूसुफ ब्रितानिया है और मैं जिहाद करने आया हूँ. जिहाद करने आया हूँ, फटने आया हूँ.
अंग्रेज मुसलमान.
हाँ, नहीं, मैं क्रिश्चियन था. आपको याद है शेख हमजा, द इमाम विद द हुक? Right. So he's a terrifying figure in the media, but for a wannabe terrorist, a fantastic alien, like a fantastic person that you can link yourself with. So I said, मैं उनके मदरसे में गया इंग्लैंड में और मैं बैठा, and I was speaking in English. So I enjoyed what he said. I said the kalma. I became a Muslim. And then my wife and my parents reported me to MI6 कि इसने दाढ़ी उगा ली है, ये अपनी शलवार ऊपर करता है, ये पागल हो गया है. तो फिर मुझे वहाँ से भागना पड़ा.
पूरी कहानी.
And the amazing thing about the कहानी is कि ये इन हर foreign fighter की यही कहानी है. चाहे वो रशिया से आया है, उज़्बेकिस्तान से आया है, इंग्लैंड से आया है, फ्रांस से आया है. वो अगर क्रिश्चियन था, उसने इस्लाम कबूल किया, उसके माँ बाप ने रिपोर्ट किया कि ये पागल हो गया है. वो बेसिकली पेरिस से ट्रेन लेके इस्तंबुल जाते हैं, इस्तंबुल से थोड़ा नॉर्थ जाते हैं, वहाँ से एक वो बस में बैठते हैं, बस से वो ईरान के थ्रू पाकिस्तान आते हैं, पाकिस्तान से वज़ीरिस्तान जाते हैं, वज़ीरिस्तान से द वर्ल्ड इज़ योर ऑयस्टर. तो मैंने वही जो उन्होंने मुझे उनकी रूट थी, जो उनकी कहानी थी, वो मैं बन गया. And then for literally maybe 4 or 5 months, I was a terrorist. Now the worst part about it was that मैंने कहा था मैं फटने आया हूँ. अब उनको इस तरह के लोगों की उधर बड़ी ज़रूरत भी होती है. So it was the stupidest thing I could have said. I should have just said मैं सीखने आया हूँ. डायरेक्ट फ़िदाई हमला तो नहीं करना. But you know, when you're painting a picture and lying, you just sometimes get caught up in it. And this was my greatest achievement, Yusuf Britannia. Through my entire story, this character that I made, and Beacon House National University, my old college, has a lot to play because I went to film school. And I do real estate. So I never thought that I would get to practice what I learned in college. And then this amazing opportunity presented itself, a stage in front of the Taliban, and I had to act to get out of there. And so I did it, and it's the best part of my story. You know, if you had seen the men in jail, they were all fighters, and they were all people like them, जिन्होंने मेरे साथ जो हुआ था वो मेरे जैसे लोग हैं. Daniel Pearl, myself, Warren, Heather Gilani, all of these people. इन सब के साथ जो कुछ हुआ है इन लोगों ने किया. मगर 2 दिन जेल में ये टूट गए. इनकी तो बिल्कुल ही फूंक निकल गई. तो I was the happiest guy in jail because now I've come from a torturous Uzbek prison into a nice Afghan Taliban jail with a system. सुबह नहा सकते हैं बाथरूम में. ये लोग तो
खाना भी ना मिल रहा था. You getting to the use of a loo, etc., etc.
Yeah. And I became Yusuf Britannia, and then Yusuf basically saved my life. He got me out of that situation safely.
No, but eventually, the gentleman you met in prison, who was the political guy from the Taliban, who was asking you for the name of the person who was helping you do the deal earlier, who was talking to your mum.
So he was one guy, and it was.
So you revealed the truth to him.
I had to.
And then he went to the Taliban and said कि ये Yusuf Britannia नहीं है.
No.
So how did that happen?
He was an Afghan commander. Right. He was a young guy, but he was a semi-senior commander who had been jailed because he refused to fight the Uzbeks. The Afghan Taliban gave an instruction that the Uzbeks have given a pledge of allegiance to ISIS. This is against us. Finish them. Wipe them off. This is where all the women and children and everybody was killed. So the Afghan Taliban were ruthless in what they were doing. In that ruthlessness, they didn't forgive their own people either. So if someone didn't take arms because उन्होंने कहा ये मुसलमानों की जंग है यार, कल तो ये आपके साथ थे, आज आप इनको कत्ल कर रहे हैं, औरतें हैं, बच्चे हैं, हमने नहीं ये करना. वो उन कमांडरों को भी उन्होंने जेल किया. उनमें
तो फिर उस कमांडर को जब आपने अपनी सच्चाई बताई तो फिर बात आगे कैसे बढ़ी?
ये इंटरेस्टिंग थी. पहले तो वो मेरी बात नहीं मान रहा था क्योंकि जो बंदा मेरी नेगोशिएशन कर रहा था
वो नाम आप भूल गए थे.
मैंने उसका नाम एक्चुअली सिर्फ एक बार 2013 में सुना था. अब मसला ये है कि अफ़गानिस्तान में हर बंदा हकानी है और कोई भी हकानी का नाम ले तो वो बहुत बड़ा नाम है, मगर कौन हकानी? तो अगेन पता नहीं मुझे वो नाम कैसे 2-3 साल बाद याद आया, बट इट टुक time. It's not like it just came overnight. I was questioned by this man. And by the way, इस आदमी ने भी मुझे कहा था ये जो तुमने कहानी बनाई हुई है, what are you doing? do you know where you're living, who you're living amongst with this Yusuf? What if one of these guys says, chalo yaar, check post udhar hai American, isko to bhejo, Allah ke paas jaldi. So, you know, it was a difficult situation. But ये एक आदमी था. अब इसको भी पता था कि इस बंदे ने क्या हरकत कर दी है, कहाँ से आया है, but मान नहीं रहा था. Once I proved to him who I was, he didn't tell the 9 riders that brought me back who I was. He said, ये वही है, बस इसको आपने क्वेटा में छोड़ना है. और मुझे पैसे भी उसने दिए. तो जब मुझे अगवा किया था, उन्होंने मेरे लिए 4 अरब रुपए मांगे थे, which I think डॉलर उस वक्त 85 पे था, was about $60 million. तो जब मैं वापस आया, मैं 15,000 रुपए के साथ वापस आया. तो मैंने अपनी अम्मी को कहा कि कुछ सबक बिजनेस के मैंने भी सीख लिए थे.
We've got not too much time left, and there's lots of questions coming in from the audience, so I'm going to be quick so that I can sum up what I've actually written. So,
this is a tough one.
Positive, no, not dark as yet. Positive change. You went to film school, mashallah, you've written a compelling novel. So as a first-time author, in hindsight, do you feel there's stuff in the book that maybe you could have had less of, or maybe stuff in the book that you've omitted and that you would maybe have liked to add on?
You know, what you see right now, there are 9 more books like that.
The same size?
Yeah, that I had to take out.
Wow.
And maybe 3 of them are about my father. And I think, forget anything that's ever happened to me. I've tried my best to chronologically tell you what happened to me and leave you with a few questions, you know, but I've been honest in terms of my timeline. But I think the greatest disservice, or maybe it's not a disservice, but the most difficult thing that I had to do was I had to keep reminding myself that that I have to tell people my story, and that meant that I couldn't tell my father's story. And actually, my story is irrelevant without his story. If you want to know how I fought starvation, it's through lessons that I learned from him. If you want to know about how I survived solitary confinement outside of my faith, it's because of lessons that I learned from him. Torture, being away from the people that you love, not giving up. A lot of these things were things that I learned from him. And in every single story that you read in this book, maybe there were 10, if you read a paragraph about me, there were 10 paragraphs to explain to you where this came from. This strength came from my father and his background and story, and I just had to take all of that out of this book. And that, you know, it's difficult for me. I wish I could tell you my parents' story. I wish I could tell you about my mother, what an amazing woman she is. You know, I feel like
She sounds completely a woman of immense strength. That's all I can say.
And you know, I feel like I did this great injustice to her, because she's kind of this strength in the background, whereas probably in this whole story, if you think about it, her husband was murdered, her son was kidnapped, and when they were actually going to execute me, I'll never forget, it was the 26th of February 2012, they told me we're going to execute you the next morning, and I was talking to my mother. And I'll never forget when she told me, she's like, you will not give up. I make the story very funny, but it was very funny. But she was very serious. And I thought I felt bad for her. I felt maybe she was blind. I felt maybe she didn't totally grasp the situation.
Boss, we're running out of time and there's so much to talk to you about. So quickly, how do you have the strength and courage to do what you're doing right now? Aren't you afraid? I mean, considering what you went through.
Afraid of these guys?
Afraid of everyone, man.
You know, I lived with them for a long time. I think if you ask them, they'd probably say we like him. You know, nikal gaya to nikal gaya.
No. Shabby T lived in a war zone, guys. Or other than becoming desensitized to death, of which he saw a lot, there were bombs falling all over. And the man went back and saved the children of his captors. So ye, mashallah, hero bhi hai. So,
you know, I love those children. And I have 3 children of my own. And I saw one of the girls killed by the Taliban in front of me. She was maybe 7 years old. And when I met her, she was maybe four or something. Her name was Zakia. And there were lots of the children. There were about 7 of these kids, and I taught them Urdu. And so I think any one of us would go back to save someone that you love, especially if you're trained in that situation, because I was running away from jet strikes and drone strikes almost every night for maybe a year and a half. There was a protocol in place. But the fact that the 3 kids had been left behind was natural. Although it wasn't natural for my kidnapper, he told the women and his brother-in-law that he's only trying to win. Yeah, he's trying to get your sympathy. Don't fall for him. He's a kafir.
Theme of today's this SOT event is Guardians of the Future. So what message do you have for the Guardians of the Future? And obviously, because of the experiences you've had, I'm not limiting that question just to the Pakistani diaspora, but the Guardians of the Future.
People have lots of things that they can guide you and tell you to do. I don't like telling people what to do, but there's one thing. You should be always true to yourself, and you should be very empathetic, not towards a Punjabi or a Hanafi, but towards a human being, any human being. Just empathy. And you would be surprised how a little bit of kindness may not affect you at all, because being kind to someone is not difficult, but you could change someone's life. When I tell you about those children, they came they were brought up by the man that did this to me. But like I told you, they put pieces of me back together. And you don't know what kindness, love, and empathy, how far this can go for people. And this is the only thing that I tell. I wish, I'd done more in my life, that I could guide you better. But I haven't. I really haven't. My father was an amazing man. If you can learn lessons from him, I would strongly urge you to not even bother reading my book, but read about him. Read about his life. Read about how he died and why he died. And the center of it all was empathy.
And finally, तालियां जी बजा लें please. तालियां कभी नहीं रोके जी, अच्छी बात है. आप लोगों को भी एक्सरसाइज मिल जाती है. And finally, boss, AI.
Yeah, this stuff is crazy.
If it was if it was a little more developed, I mean, it's still in its nascent stage. Do you think technology would have helped in securing your release?
So drones run on AI. They are automatic, like, yeah. So I had a lot of AI around me all the time, precision-based AI. But it is something phenomenal. I have I don't want to say his age, an older uncle, a friend of my father's, who doesn't like for me to quote his age because he thinks he's my age. And he said that humans have evolved. If you look back at our recorded history to where we stand today, we are evolution. And AI, you can look at it as something dangerous that will replace human beings or the most magnificent thing to help you progress. For me, personally, I'm not like you guys. So I have a 5-year handicap on everyone in terms of I miss this startup revolution completely. I was doing better things in Bora Bora, Tora Bora, whatever that place was. So smartphones didn't exist. I was on a BlackBerry, which was like maybe generation 1 of what could be a smartphone. And I came back to the iPhone 6 and WhatsApp and Instagram and stories and TikTok, and God knows the amount of information that you can get from this device in 1 hour. I do actually, in these last 8 years through my smartphone, I have managed to get more knowledge than I did in my entire school and college. So technology is the most phenomenal thing that we have as human beings, as a species. I really believe in embracing it with, of course, barriers. Like you were talking about a few things in Pakistan that, children. So I do believe that there are certain things that you have to control, but it is just the most wonderful thing that I've seen.
Question from the audience. Stockholm Syndrome.
God, you don't want this. No, it's very difficult to relate to someone who is abusing you, who is torturing you. It's very difficult to find friendship with these people. Even my guard, जिसके साथ मैं मैन यूनाइटेड की गेमें सुनता था, जब मैं जेल से जा रहा था, मेरी बुक में भी ये लिखा है, उसने मुझे ये बात कही थी. उसने कहा था कि तुम मतलब because of how I was in those 4 or 5 months in the prison, a very happy man. So he said, you know, I was good to you. और वो तो he was in the worst situation now.
The Uzbek who was arrested, the guy who used to listen to the footy with.
The Man United games. So I told him, I explained to him, I was like, you were not good to me. You needed to listen to these Man United games, and the only place you could listen to this haram content was in a jail with me. If we'd been caught, we'd both get daraz, right? So you weren't doing this as some love or empathy for me. You did it for yourself. You needed the escape, and I was more than happy to escape with you. But you pulled my nails out. You kept me away from my family. You carved, you took pieces of flesh from my body. You buried me. You did things to me that, no friend could ever do. So it's very difficult to have any Stockholm syndrome with these people. But again, I love those children. They were just little innocent children. And and by the way, there's a wonderful writer called Miss Kala Power who tells you that even amongst the maddest of men, don't ever forget their mothers and their brothers and their children, because they're innocent. They're all innocent. You can, by the way, see this in some of the conflicts that are happening today. One person's act, and some people feel they have the right to kill 8,000 innocent people. So you cannot forget the innocent people. You cannot forget them. There is no such thing. I don't believe in collateral damage. And I'm telling you this as someone who has lived with people who deserve nothing better than to be collateral damage. But it's not the way. It's not the way that human beings should move forward.
There's a question here which says, have you ever felt compelled, conditioned to be talking about your captivity when you meet people?
I have a problem. Every time someone meets me, I'm like, I'm the guy who got kidnapped. As a matter of fact,
Is that your calling card?
Yeah, it's you had this wonderful introduction, and mine is, he's the kidnappee. But I wear this. I enjoy it. It is a pretty cool thing to get kidnapped and escape.
When are we seeing the movie?
So what I wanted to do was write the book, and my grandfather was a writer. My father wrote a book. Faiz Ahmed Faiz is my Khalu Dada. I felt that there's a certain justice that you have to do to your lineage as well, to your line. And, it's there. Of course, it's what everybody wants. But again, for me right now, the most important, somebody will make the movie, but I would love to write about my father.
And finally, this is quite interesting. How hard was it to reconnect with your relations?
So I have the worst friends that you can meet. As a matter of fact, when I came back, I have this friend, his name is Ehsan. I shouldn't even mention this guy, he's such an embarrassment. But anyways, as soon as I come back, he grabs me and he's like, listen, are you that Homeland guy? I was like, I've been gone for 5 years. Who is Homeland? He's like, the guy who came back from the Taliban and then became a Taliban and then infiltrated the CIA. I was like, bro, I just got back 2 hours ago. What is wrong with you? So he's like, okay, so not a suicide bomber, right? So, but I have the most amazing friends and the most wonderful family. It's a unit. I was telling you, I wonder if I could have been the person that I was if there was a prisoner exchange. And that would have been a very difficult place to be in life. But I wonder if I could be the person that I am today if I didn't have my family and my friends and so many wonderful people who have supported me. Because really I am just someone who got kidnapped. I don't know what I yap on about half the time. But it is such an honor and such a pleasure to be kidnapped and then get to speak to you guys and tell my story.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shahbaz Taseer,
Thank you.
Man who's made of a wood that does not burn easily.